right. It is remarkably hard to research the history of the rubber chicken. In fact, a search for history of rubber chicken turns up a ton of blogs, right? And you're all excited and you're looking through until you realize that they're all linking to each other and they're all citing like 2 different sources. And of these originally sourced articles, there's one from the Deseret News in 1995 declaring the rubber chicken, quote, the source of mankind's universally humorous reaction to the dumbest of all dime store novelties. Another article oft cited from Modern Farmer, because of course, quotes an historian saying the novelty was, quote, brutally witless and has no art to it. Yeah, how dare they? How dare they? Amazingly, despite the ubiquity of the rubber chicken as, quote unquote, humor, it's near impossible to find someone willing to explain why it has been funny for so long. And yet, they are everywhere. Muppets love them. Monty Python loves them. This guy fucking loves them. And these folks, well, oh, the sound, can you hear it? Anyway, this goes on. And this is just one of many selections. So why? Why? You know a rubber chicken when you see it, and you know one when you hear it, and you know it's supposed to be humorous, but why do we give a fuck about rubber chickens? Well, dear friends, we first need to dive into other times where there's been such a demand for fake poultry as a theatrical prop. So like many odd salon things, we're gonna start in the Middle Ages, which is a really great place to start. So are you here for the first time, newbies? Here's the Middle Ages Cliff's Notes, which if you're under 25 is what we used to use for tests before ChatGPT. Some of us did. Too soon. It's the period of time from the fall of the Roman Empire to the 15th century with a shift from the colonial occupation of Rome to the feudal rule of kings and lords governing over their little bits of land in Europe. The period is also known as the Dark Ages for its slower economic and scientific development, a shit ton of religious conflict, and the spread of numerous deadly diseases that wiped out large amounts of the population. It wasn't great, y'all, okay? It wasn't great. And I don't know, there's maybe some parallels to now, but we're just gonna keep going. But there was some fun, if you call that fun, in some places. Think jesters, right? These performers entertained feudal rulers through song, music, magic tricks, and of course, jokes. They were supposedly the only ones in the royal court able to criticize their bosses because they snuck that criticism in through innuendo. This, of course, was a delicate dance, as just one joke over the line, and we know that, feudal rulers are notoriously thin-skinned, said jester could be banished or tried for treason, possibly losing little things like their lives in the process. So how does one entertain one's mercurial lord in a time before TV and internet and other ways to inject comedy straight into your veins? Well, you used what was around you, and I guess that involved dead poultry. So what is the chicken of it all? Some suppose that jesters used various dead animals as satire to reflect the gluttony of the royal courts they served. And by the way, I know that jokes are not funny when they're explained. So you've got more of this. It's a way of pointing out how their prosperity stood out of touch with the common folks who were, starving or dying of the plague. Some claim that the bodies of dead fowl were used as weapons in duels because there's no possible way to confuse that with an actual sword. So you don't have a jester going to parry and getting stabbed by somebody else. So various items served many purposes in the stories these performers told. You've heard of slapstick, yes? Yep. Exaggerated physical comedy with the laughs generated by both intentional and unintentional violence. Well, what is a literal slapstick? In Commedia dell'arte, a literal slapstick consisted of 2 thin strips of wood slapped together to make a loud noise with very little effort. Slapsticks were used to heighten a scene by providing rudimentary sound effects for fight scenes. And where do rubber chickens show up today? a hell of a lot of slapstick comedy. And humans are nothing if not utterly predictable. So those sweeping comedic habits lasted centuries, popping up in another form of popular performance, vaudeville. And by the way, these next two slides have nothing to do with what I'm talking about. I just spent way too much time on the Library of Congress website, and I just wanted to include them. So vaudeville, we fast forward a few hundred years, and chickens are showing up. Vaudeville, first popularized in France at the end of the 19th century. Again, apologies for the TLDR on this, but vaudeville shows were big, brash endeavors that were painted in broad strokes. In the beginning, it stood in contrast to niche or high-crust theater. It was designed for as broad an entertainment factor as possible, so as to attract large crowds that paid money. So think not of subtlety, but think of hitting base emotions, romance, drama, humor. Think of slapsticks and pratfalls, and of course, chickens? And here's where I mention a very odd Salon-y little factoid that kind of sucks, which is some comedic historians believe that one of the first vaudevillian usages of a chicken was by John Holmberg, the Swedish blackface clown. Holmberg would go on stage with food, including chicken, stuffed into his pockets to make fun of the upper crust of the audience in a similar fashion to jesters of yore. In fact, I have a picture. No, I don't. I don't have a fucking picture of blackface. How dare you? So none of that history explains the ubiquity of a rubber chicken as an indicator of comedy in mass media. So this is why we now turn to Act 3 of this talk, which is post-World War II, I'm kind of fudging the 1945, novelty item production explosion. So this is an original 1922 black and white print for the Johnson, Smith & Company. You've probably heard of novelty items, yes? Yeah? Well, maybe none of the ones from this ad, because serpent's eggs, I don't know. But I am sure that you have been on the receiving end of one at a holiday white elephant gift party, for instance. A novelty item is something that is designed to serve no practical purpose whatsoever, purchased or given solely for the quote-unquote humor of the thing itself. You know, you love them. Things like a pet rock, a chia pet, sex dice, magnetic poetry, chattering teeth, and my one plastic flamingo, and my absolute personal favorite, the big mouth Billy Bass. That'll be my next talk. So, everything I mentioned here became popular after World War II, yes? Why was that? Well, because of everything else that made the post-World War II era the one that all the reactionary dumbasses around the world are yearning to return to. Plastics plus middle-class discretionary spending equals capitalism, baby! And that meant plastic novelty toys. This is a real ad, by the way. I don't get it either. Okay, some background, and the reason why this is appropriate, this is paraphrased from a PBS special on plastics and American culture after World War II. Around the time of the nuclear explosions at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, a DuPont vice president was speaking on how to convert factories from military to consumer production after the war, pointing out, quote, a great backlog of unfilled wants, unquote, as the war was coming to an end. He believed that the unfilled capitalistic hunger would create, quote, an upward spiral of productivity, raising the standard of living, increasing the national income, and making more jobs, unquote. But in scarily prophetic words, this executive also said that, quote, a satisfied people is a stagnant people, unquote, suggesting us Americans will never be satisfied. And that's where these two dudes, one I don't have a picture of, George Loftus, and his stepson, Gene Rose, come into play. You see, they ran a company called Loftus International, one of the largest worldwide purveyors of novelty items. In 1939, George Loftus opened a novelty and magic trick store in Salt Lake City. They made their own gags, including something that was described as an electric nose cleaner made from a rubber finger and a cord. And post-World War II, it grew to become one of the largest wholesaler and exporters of gag gifts and other plastic gizmos, including the rubber chicken. Loftus International were supposedly the first to produce and market a rubber chicken made out of latex, for which I call my second prop. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. This is a rubber chicken I ordered from Amazon from Loftus International. And what's so freaking delightful about this whole thing is that when he was asked in 2006 by the Chicago Tribune why rubber chickens were so popular, and by the way, this is when I thought I had the real smoking chicken gun with this whole thing. Gene, our friend Gene here, said, quote, "I don't know. It's unreal how many of these we sell. It's just been a crazy thing." Gene repeated this sentiment in interview upon interview for decades. Believe me, I read them. For decades, despite helping fuel the demand for rubber chickens, he could never point to a reason why people want to buy rubber chickens. And that, my friend, brings us back to where we began, this fucking thing, and why I wanted to do a talk about it. Because I genuinely thought, let me first say, I failed you tonight. Because I genuinely thought I could get to the bottom of this mystery for you. But in nearly every single article and story and academic paper about rubber chickens on JSTOR, no one could point to a single point of poultry origin. And this is why I love Odd Salon, okay? I've loved this gathering of weirdo obsessives to talk about topics most people would comically roll their eyes over since the very first night we got on this stage to talk about the Enlightenment. Did I ever think I'd think this much about a rubber chicken? Of course not. But am I at all surprised that when looked at through the Odd Salon lens, it would somehow tie together courts of royalty, commedia dell'arte, blackface comedy, the world's insatiable hunger for plastics, and our innate attraction to broad symbols that tickle that one little part of your brain? Of course I wasn't surprised. Because this is the kind of rabbit hole we, all of us, those that are speaking, all of you weirdos who are here on a Tuesday night, this is what we hunger for. For Odd Salon is not for the normies. Oh no, it's for those of us who can't help but go uncomfortably deep on topics others don't give a shit about. So everyone, if we could raise our glasses for the final-ish toast of this evening, to rubber chickens, to meandering stories, and to those utterly magical humans who brought us together for both.